afternoon. It's Sunday the 23rd of September. My name's Caroline. Some of you may know me from the blog Caroline's Corner. I've had a written blog on Blogger for the last 13-14 years, I think. I've decided to try and take a leap into the world of Flosstube to as I've been enjoying everybody else's videos, and my kids keep nattering about wanting a YouTube channel, so I thought I'd better work out how things went. I am a mum of two. I've been married for 23 years and currently working as an administrator at a further education college. I live in Leeds in West Yorkshire. And I've been stitching for about 24 years. I always did lots of crafty projects and embroidery and things as a child, and but got firmly into cross stitch shortly after I met my husband. My first ever cross stitch piece was by Teresa Wensler. Nothing like diving in at the deep end. It was her. I picked up the kit for the castle, which I'm sure is a design everyone is familiar with the dragon round the castle. I sort of picked it up and thought, won't be too hard. And then after I'd spent 2 days separating the floss, because the floss was just in two big bundles, I started to wonder what on earth I'd let myself in for. However, a couple of years later, and it did eventually get finished. As you can see, I've never actually got around to doing anything with it, because by the time it was finished, it was absolutely filthy. I've managed to get the worst of the dirt out over the years with washing, but I think I'm going to have to tea or coffee dye it before I can actually do anything with it, just because some of the dirt is just too ingrained. It was also stitched on Ada, which for a Teresa Wensler just doesn't really work. The next thing I stitched was a Just Nan sampler on linen, and while everyone seems to go, oh, linen's so hard, back then, I started it and then thought, do you know what, that dragon would have been so much easier on this, and have never looked back. I do still occasionally, very, very occasionally stitch on Ada, but I haven't done much of that since I stitched this one. So there you go, that was my first foray into cross stitch. What you can expect to see on my videos: some stitching, mostly samplers, and or sets of smalls. There's other stuff, but that's primarily what I do. Don't expect to see too many finishes. I work full time, and I don't get a lot of stitching time or knitting time. You will see some knitting because that's my other main hobby. You may occasionally even see some sewing if I've had time to do any. You will also see books, because reading. I read at work at my lunch breaks, because that helps me carve out the time to do that. And reading has been a passion since I was a kid. Right, on to my whips. The first one I'm going to show you is a reproduction sampler. It's from the sampler that was reproduced on the inside of the dust jacket of the Goodheart sampler book, which I'm sure many of you know, produced by Needleprint, the wonderful Jacqueline Holsworth. I was lucky enough to get to go to both sampler symposiums that she ran at the Ackworth School. Ackworth is quite close to me, so I went to the first launch of the Quaker sampler book by Carol Humphreys, and I was also lucky enough to go, though at the time my daughter was a baby, so I just went for the day, and had to come home in the evenings. So we got the kit for the sampler at the symposium, and I've been working on it ever since. like I say, you don't see too many finishes. The sampler is a Scottish sampler, stitched in 1757 is the date on it. The maker is unknown. I think Michelle of Cozy Egg has also shown this one on her videos as well. So that is the complete sampler. And this, since I went to the symposium 10 years ago, is how far I've got. I've got all the border stitched, and I have just finished all the alphabets, and I'm moving on to all the black work down the bottom half. I've got one boxer in there so far, and I'm just working on the floral motif next to him. I'm using the lambswool linen that we were given and the silks. I'm not sure what brand the silks are. The chart calls for Pearsall's, but that's not what they gave us. I think they're either MPI, might be MPI, or Avoir au Soir. When I picked it up this time round, like I said, I've done the bits of the black work, and I finished the last couple of motifs at the end of the alphabet. Very glad to have finished all those curly Q Gothic alphabets. I'm sure I will be equally fed up of the back stitch by the time I've done all the black work motifs at the bottom. I do tend to work with a rotation. I kind of slipping from it at the moment because I can't get settled, so I'm just sort of randomly picking a project or two out to work on every week. I don't get set. I'm lucky if I get about 5 to 6 hours of stitching time in a week. The next whip I worked on recently is one by Lauren Sawa of Forget-Me-Nots in Stitches. It's called Take a Lovely Sampler. This was a class that I took with Lauren back in 2006. She had a very good friend who was a sampler collector who sadly since passed away, and she let Lauren chart some of her samplers, and Lauren took this sampler in the collection and took some of the motifs to make into a set of smalls. As always with any of Lauren's designs, she tends to use a mix of threads. There's a mix of sampler threads, silks, carom silks, water lilies, and some metallic in there. What I was working on recently, I have all the smalls stitched. I'm working on the bag, so I was stitching the top band here. The chart calls for Palestrina knots. I think I didn't fancy doing those, so I've subbed some other crosses. So I just have the bag to finish, having got quite a lot done a while ago. So the other smalls, there is a pincushion. You'll see I optimistically put 2015, that I thought I might finish the stitching on these. There is a needle fob, a scissor rest, and a needle case, which I started the finishing of in the class in 2006. We'll get done some eventually, just don't hold your breath. My next whip is another one of Lauren's. This is called The Rose is Red. It was a small pincushion that she designed to commemorate the Queen's Diamond Jubilee, because she was over teaching in London at that the same year. Let's see if I can show you. There is a very small picture of the wording on the inside, on the back, which I haven't stitched yet. So this is my progress. I am almost done with the top of the pincushion. But being one of Lauren's designs, there's lots and lots of layering of colour and quite complicated. These are all queen stitches and 2 colours, and there is another stitch in there as well. So they're not the speediest of designs. This is all using sampler threads. I don't have these ones on a nice holder because I just never got round to it. I decided to crack on with the stitching. Sorry. I also have a cold, the peril of working with in a college, and we had the students back this week. The next whip again was one I started as a Shawl on Facebook, Dorothy Walpole. She's a beautiful sampler, but again, I've been working on her for a while. I got rather bogged down with this Bargello band. I'm stitching her in the Call for DMC on 40 count Lakeside linen pearl barley, I think. So here we are. I say it's taken me a good couple of years to just do that band there. Very glad to be finished with it. This time when I had her out, I was doing some more border, because once I get this done, then it's on to all the floral motifs down there, and I'm hoping they are going to work up an awful lot quicker. But she's a beautiful, beautiful girl, if a bit on the big side. This is on 40 count. I hate to think what size she'd have been if I'd stitched her on something smaller. As I said, I'm working on her on the DMC. The Shawl on Facebook finished a couple of years ago through, I think it was Sampler World Group. But we shall shoot again. We'll get finished eventually, I hope. When I retire, maybe. Now on to one that is almost finished. This is the Drawn Thread Prairie Garden. This is one of the first, this chart had been in my stash for best part of 20 years. So I decided I have stitched all the other gardens in the series, the Cloister Garden, Wildflower Garden and Alpine Garden. I just needed to finish Prairie Garden. And I have just one more row to go. One more dividing row and then the last band. So hopefully this one will get finished this year. I really got motoring with her over the summer. I went on a stitching retreat with friends and got this middle bit done back in June, and then in the summer I managed to get the next 2 bands finished. This is being stitched in, this is summer khaki, 32 count summer khaki, and I'm using the MPI that came in the thread pack with the chart. I say, long overdue getting this one stitched and on my wall. Pardon me. The next whip I'm going to show you is the white whip I'm working on for the Instagram Santa Sundays stitch along. I'm doing the pomegranate sampler by Plum Street Samplers. I picked this chart up last year at a stitching weekend at Fobbles, which is a rather wonderful shop in the Lake District, and I've been wanting to start it ever since. Here we go. I'm making reasonable progress on Santa. He's I'm using the Call for Classic Colourworks stroke crescent colours. It's better. And I'm stitching him on vintage light exemplar, 36 count vintage light exemplar that I had in my stash. I'm thoroughly loving working on him, even if I only get about an hour a night each week in. Here are the classic colourworks that I've got. I do love the red currant. My last whip that I've actually been working on this week is Home of a Needleworker 2 by Little House Needleworks. I needed something to take on holiday. We went camping that I could stitch in a tent without needing a magnifier or a light to see. So I pulled this one out and a piece of white Jobelan that I had in my stash, 28 count, because that's all I can do without a magnifier really these days. I'm using the Call for threads, the crescent colours. Again, I got sent this in an exchange and it's been sat in my stash a while. Thoroughly enjoying working on this one. I got onto the house by the time we came in the week we were away, and I did a little bit of filling in on the house building this week. I was working on the windows and starting to fill in on the blue jeans that is the house colour. And these are the threads, the crescent colourworks. Again, I like the red of the razzleberry. So I'm using a random number generator to decide which whip I work on each week, and next week it's thrown up another whip, another of my projects from Lauren Sauer, Forget Me Nots and Stitches. This one's called Blastin Regard, and I don't know whether you'll be able to see that very well because the photo is quite faint. I took this class with Lauren, I think it was 2012 maybe. Again, been there a while. It's all stitched in Gentle Arts colours, some beautiful soft colours. It's a sewing case, in case you couldn't work it out from the picture. I've stitched the outsides and the inside of the case, and I'm now working on all the pockets to put your tools in. So there was a big pocket, and that has another pocket on the middle, which I think is this one, or is that? That's another of the pockets. Sorry. The pocket I'm working on at the moment is this one with the flowers on, and then I've got another 4 to do, and then we might see about getting it assembled, if I can, or it can go on the finishing pile. So I'm looking forward to getting back to that next week, and hopefully in my next video I will show you some progress. The last stitching thing I have to share with you today is a little bit of stash. I don't buy huge amounts of stash. I have a massive stitching stash from before I had the kids, so I tend to try and shop my stash first, but there are some things I can't resist. One of those is any new release from Hands Across the Sea samplers. I do like the samplers that Nicola and Sandra choose to reproduce, and this is the Esther Benson sampler they've done for Sassy Jacks. Now, fortunate enough that they've entered a partnership arrangement with Fobbles, who are up in the Lake District, and so I was able to get this lovely sampler from Beverly. Don't know when I'll get round to stitching it, but I love the amount of detail that Nicola puts in, and research that Nicola puts into her sampler charts. I really do appreciate all of that. So that's my only stash this month. Next up is knitting. I have just cast off my latest shawl. I knit a lot of shawls. This is, you may be able to tell, and particularly by Helen Stewart of Curious Handmade. I've been in her Shawl Society since she launched it 3 years ago. So this is the first shawl, move back a bit, from Shawl Society 3, the Maven shawl. So it will be, you will see it again next video when I've blocked it. I've knit this. I wanted to get this finished for next week because it's Yarndale, and I will see the yarn dyer at Yarndale and I will show what I did with the shawl. The yarn I used, this is the chart with the finished shawl. Sorry, I only print my patterns in black and white. The yarn I used was from the Border Tart. She does indigo dyeing her yarn, so the blue and pink here is one of her twins colorways. That's a 4-ply that's blue face Leicester, silk and cashmere. And the contrast colour is also by the Border Tart, and it is her Venus 4-ply Deluxe, and is a baby alpaca, linen and silk mix. You might imagine it's beautifully soft and was absolutely wonderful to knit with. As I said, I've been in the Shawl Society for 3 years, and this is the second of those shawls I've knit. This is the first of the Shawl Society shawls. This was the Talisman shawl from season 1. And I finished that at Christmas when I was on holiday over the Christmas. This one is knit in 5 Moon Arts 4-ply in the colourway Under the Sea. And my job when I finish doing this video is to take that shawl and block it. The next knitting whip the next knitting whip I have, I do try and always have a garment on the needle because I like stitching. I don't get a lot of knitting time, and it will take me the best part of a year to knit a sweater, but I do get a lot of wear out of them. I'm knitting the Scholle cardigan by Carrie Westerman, which I am knitting in some Blacker Yarns Lioness, which is their wool and linen blend, the double knit, and it's in the hematite colourway. As you can see, I've done, actually I'm showing you the back actually, because it's reverse stocking stitches, this one. Oops. So I've done the pattern down the bottom, and I'm working up through the waist decreases at the moment. I've only a few more of those to go, and then I will be onto the increasing for the bust. This is actually haven't worked on this much at all this month because I wanted to get the shawl finished, so I'm looking forward to getting back on with that. I forgot to say the shawl's knit on 4mm needles, as is this gollet. I tend to go for Knit Pros just because that's what I can get hold of easily when I'm looking for needles. I just pop down to RMU to buy some. My other knitting whip is some socks for my daughter. She's a trainee yarn addict as well. So when we went to the they have a yarn festival at Leeds Grammar School called Spring into Wool in April, and she chose the yarn for these. These are Hermione's Everyday Socks. So I finished one for the first sock, and I am on with sock number 2. The yarn she chose is from Jo Knit Sew, and the colourway is Black Butterfly, which is a merino, nylon and sparkle. She's 10. What can I say about sparkly? She wanted sparkly socks. These mostly get knit at swimming lessons. When I'm sat waiting, or dancing lessons, or drama, or wherever I'm sat waiting for a child to finish what they're doing. And sorry, I don't think I said this is the Hermione's Everyday Sock pattern. And when I finished the pair for her, I think I shall be knitting myself some Hermione's Everyday Socks because I quite like them, and mixing my fandoms up by knitting them in some Back to the Discworld yarn from Joy of the Knitting Goddess. So that's where I am for knitting. I have to decide now which shawl I'm going to cast on next. Now I've got that one off the needles. It's likely to be another Helen Stewart shawl. I do have practically all the shawls for the season 1 and season 2 of the Shawl Society kitted up. So it's going to be a case of which one's calling to me the loudest, I think, or which yarn more likely is calling to me the loudest. Right, on to reading. As you might be able to tell behind me, I like reading. My husband and I are both avid bibliophiles. Dave not so much as me. He can cope with ebooks. I've never quite gotten the hang of ebooks. I do like a nice imprint, and one of my favourites is Persephone books. They come in these lovely grey covers, and then they put beautiful textiles appropriate to the subject matter of the book on the inside cover as the end papers. They're absolutely beautiful books. Just one reason I like them. This one is called A Fortnight in September by R.C. Sheriff. It's about a family who go family holiday, it's their summer holiday, and their thoughts and concerns and worries because the two older children are grown up and working, and it's will they want to go away on holiday? Is the holiday accommodation that they choose to stay in, will it be there like next year, because they've always stayed in the same place they go to Bognor Regis every year for a fortnight in September, and it's all about their holiday. I loved it. I was reading it on holiday. Perfect holiday read. Really, can't recommend it enough. The next book I read recently. This summer I've been getting to know Emily Starr. by the Emily books by Ellen Montgomery. Anne Shirley is a kindred spirit I've known, who's of long acquaintance. I first read her when I was 8 or 9, and I have loved the Anne of Green Gables books ever since. But I'd never read the Emily books because they weren't in print in the UK. And then a few years ago, Virago, another favourite in print, brought out new copies once they came out of copyright in the UK, and they have these absolutely gorgeous covers. Aren't they beautiful? So I read one a month for the last 3 months, and I loved meeting Emily. I think having read her now, I really relate to her a lot more than I possibly would have done as a child when it was more Anne. But my daughter is planning on reading these as well once she's read Anne of Green Gables. So, love Ellen Montgomery. Now, slightly different style of book, Iris Murdoch, her novel The Bell. It's all about there an abbey and a lay community attached to it, and it's set in the 70s, and some of it's very 1970s, and so concerns sexuality and adultery and what's going on the links between the two communities. You don't see much of the abbey, they're just there in the background. It's more about what's going on in the lay community, who are preparing to put a new bell into the abbey because the old bell was lost several hundred years ago, but is found during the book. I like this more than I thought I would because Iris Murdoch can sometimes be quite hard work. Another reprint, and another favourite author of mine is Elsie Jeanette Oxenholme. She wrote a series of books called the Abbey School, that got known as the Abbey School books. I started collecting vintage school stories when I was in my teens. When I got introduced to Eleanor M. Brent Dyer of the Chalet School and Elsie Jeanette Oxenholme. My mum had one of Elsie's books on the bookshelf. She didn't have many books she'd kept from her childhood, but Jen of the Abbey School was one of them, and I read it when I was a kid and loved it. And then started trawling the charity shops to find, and second-hand bookshops to find some more. In recent years, the Elsie Jeanette Oxenholme Society has started reprinting some of the harder to find have been granted the rights to reprint some of the harder to find titles. This one, Rosalie's New School, was written in 1913. And it's all set up on the moors, in the North York Moors near Gartland. And there's a tangled inheritance and combined with a school story. I loved it. It's a topic that Elsie wrote books about a few times and did it slightly differently every time. What I'm reading at the moment sorry, is another Virago. As I say, I love Viragos. I'm known to go into second-hand bookshops, and if I see especially one of these classic green spine Viragos, I will buy. If I haven't got it, I will buy them. I come out with massive piles of them sometimes and have an equally massive to read pile. So this one is by Storm Jameson. Storm, well, her given name is Margaret. She is from Whitby, so up on the North York coast. Company Parade is the first novel in a series about a woman called Hervey Russell, and was published in 1934, and concerns Hervey trying to get to grips with life after the First World War, marriage, motherhood, trying to find wanting a career at the time, and some of her friends and how they cope with life, again dealing with life after having been in the trenches. So it starts in 1919, and I'm sort of working my way through it at the moment. She wrote several books about the family that Hervey Russell comes from. She wrote another series that was about Hervey's grandmother, which I've not read. I don't think. I could be wrong, but I'll tell you what I think about this when I get to the end of it, probably in my next video. So if you stuck with me this long, thank you. I didn't think I was going to be able to talk for this long, so that's a novelty. I expect I'll record on a sort of monthly basis. So thank you for bearing with me if you watch this. If you would like to subscribe or leave a comment, I would very much appreciate it. So thank you very much, and I shall see you next time.